Good afternoon, everybody. So still able to record outside. Hopefully we'll have a nice long fall. And certainly I hope you all enjoying this lovely weather. So we start with the Mundaka Upanishad. And well, it can be, Mundaka can mean the shaven headed one. If you had to guess, why would an Upanishad be called the shaven-headed one? Take a second and think. What do you think? Could it perhaps be because who's shaving their heads? The renunciates of the world, and the ascetics with this SC, not aesthetic with a TH, but ascetics. I'm going to be using that word. So I don't think I'm talking about the aesthetics in a visual or an artistic sort of way, but asceticism. Those who do asceticism are ascetics. And in Sanskrit, they're called the Tyagis, lots of names. Nowadays in India, probably Babas. So therefore, we get the sense right off in the title that this is for renunciates. This is for those who are serious enough to seek truth, that they're renouncing the world. And one of the signs of that, external kind of displays of that, is shaving the head. So actually, if you're a sadhu, which is somebody who has renounced the world in the pursuit of truth, right? I might be using that word a bit. sadhu, the sadhus. You either grow your hair, or you shave it. If you grow it, you can't be combing it with a hairdryer and going down to the stylist. No. Dreadlocks, no, not the dreadlocks that you spend, $200 in Brooklyn and they put beads, not those kind of dreadlocks. Like you just put cow dung in to keep the bugs out. Cow dung is very antiseptic, by the way. Don't stick your nose up at it. It has wonderful hygienic qualities. So you might pack some cow dung into, and then you just pile it up, and if it just becomes like a mat, matted, that's real. So maybe that's not, we shouldn't call that dreadlocks. That's what we like to call it matted hair. So, okay, so right off, so there we have it. This may be one of my favorite Upanishads. I think it is my favorite Upanishad. I love this Upanishad. Let's kick off. Let's go right in. So let me do screen share. So the shaven-headed Upanishad, an Upanishad for ascetics, likely forest dwellers. Remember that we had Aranyaka. The Aranyaka was the forest. And we start off, Brahma rose as the first among gods. Now, don't get Brahma. You see the A with a line over it? That's not Brahman that we've been talking about so much. We've encountered in so many places in the Upanishads. This is a celestial being. And in later Hindu iconography, he's displayed as having 4 heads. And there's various stories in different Puranas about how he got his 4 heads. But he's in the Puranic tradition, Purana, another genre of text, and that's where we get all the stories of Ganesh, the great Hindu deities, Shiva, Krishna. I work with the Krishna Purana, the Bhagavata Purana. I spent my whole lifetime translating and working with that. There's 18 Puranas. I think hopefully we discussed that. And Brahma in that, he's not God with a big G. Remember, the celestials are just subject to karma like we are, but they have much better karma, so they have better embodiments. Now and creation is cyclical, right? Last, I think, 14 billion years, something like that, and then it's emanates out and then sort of gets retracted into the power of God, Vishnu, in the later tradition, and then the next cycle begins. Now, the person from a previous cycle with the best karma, but not quite liberated. That means there's still maybe some desire binding that entity to the world, some unfulfilled desire. That becomes Brahma, but with the best karma out of all the beings of a previous cycle. So Brahma, with the long A, and then he gets the job of creating. He doesn't create matter itself, Prakriti. That's Vishnu. That's a Shakti of Vishnu. But if you think about it, if you're God, you should be simply enjoying your own blissful nature with Krishna, enjoying just love with your devotees. You don't have a job to do, because then you get bound by that. If God had a dharma or a duty, such as creation, when most people think of a supreme being, and we'll see you know, the logicians are going to use creation as an argument to say there must be an original, you know, intelligent being to oversee creation. So usually when we think about the, you know, creation, we think about God. Well, it's a bit more complicated in Hinduism, because Brahma is the creator. He's more like an engineer. An engineer doesn't create, you know, bricks and mortar and the stuff of a house. Engineer puts it together expertly. So Vishnu is actually the creator of the stuff, the matter itself. In the late tradition, and of course the Shaiva traditions might say the same thing about Shiva. We'll talk about that when we get to the next class, which is the Shaiva Upanishad, where Shiva present word, not the term Shiva actually doesn't come in it, but let's wait. It's actually Rudra or Hara, but let's wait till we get to next week and discuss that. So Brahma is a creator god in the sense of taking pre-existing material, which he doesn't create, but then he creates the forms of the universe. So Brahma rose as the first among gods, as the creator of all. Remember, that's all within the world. He doesn't actually create the universes themselves. The matter, the stuff, the ultimate metaphysical stuffness of the universe, Brahma doesn't create. As the guardian of the world, okay? So there are the knowledge. Now we're going to jump around a bit. So Atharvan, his first, we don't need to get involved in some of these less important things from our point of view. The knowledge of Brahman, and I notice it's got an N on the end and a small b. Up here, you got a big B, capital B with an A and a line over the A. And that's the difference. This is the absolute truth we've been talking about up to now. Whereas this is the celestial created being, you know, engineer God. The knowledge of Brahman, which Brahma taught him. So here we see the two of them together. Brahma taught the knowledge of Brahman. Since he's the first created being, then one of his duties, in addition to creation, is that the Veda is revealed to him in his mind. He does not create the Veda, but he's the first to manifest it in the world. So Brahma, according to some traditions, other traditions, we'll see with the Mimamsas, they're not going to be happy with that. They're going to say, no, the Veda is eternal. Nobody articulated them, but that's a problem that we'll encounter. That's something we'll engage when we need to. But most Puranic, most Hindu traditions, we can say for now, simply put, Brahma is the first. He reveals the Veda. So the knowledge of Brahman, which Brahma taught him, both the higher and the lower. What do you think the higher and the lower might be? The higher in the Upanishads would be knowledge of the Atman and Brahman, that's higher. And then there's lower knowledges like astronomy and, you know, these other kinds of knowledges are lower. They're knowledge, they're valid, they have their place, they're indispensable, but they're lower in the sense that they deal with the material, with the body, the mind. The higher is that which deals with the true self. Here, let's see how this Upanishad positions these two types of knowledge. So these two types of knowledge a man should learn. Those who know Brahman tell us. See, the Upanishads themselves see their own teachings as coming from older teachings. Because here it says, those who know Brahman told, but they must have told them in the past then, so that must mean they must have told them before this Upanishad. So every so often we get these little indications in the text itself. But the teachings are much older than these texts. We don't have access to anything prior to this. They would have been oral transmissions, but they were there. So two types of knowledge. We know they were there because the Upanishads themselves say they were there. Older knowledge is handed down. So two types of knowledge a man should learn. Those who know Brahman tell us. The higher and the lower. Okay, what are the lower? The lower of the two consists of the Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda, the Sama Veda, the Atharva Veda. Phonetics, how to pronounce words. The ritual science, how to perform a Vedic sacrifice. Grammar, how to construct language coherently. Etymology, you know, the meanings of words. Metrics, you know, how to chant. There's 3 pitches in Vedic chanting. When do you go up and when do you go down? Agnamehele purohitam. That's the science of metrics. And astronomy. Why astronomy? Because you need to know when to go. This is all connected with the ritual. These 4 Rig Vedic hymns, the hymns are recited during the ritual. Phonetics is, to make the ritual work, pronunciation has to be precise. Then the ritual science itself, how to how to perform it, or how to line up the instruments, in what order, where to tie the sacrificial animal. There were animal sacrifice, my friends. Later tradition rejects that, but in the early tradition, animals were sacrificed. So all of this is connected to ritual, which from the Upanishadic point of view is lower. Rituals are just, you try to perpetuate the universe, and on the one hand, and also certain rituals that you do, you just have to do, nimitta, and then there's kamya, and there's rituals you do if you have a desire, you want a son. That's all lower. Higher is seek the self and renounce everything. This is why this Upanishad is Mundaka. Shave your head and renounce everything. Right. Whereas the higher is that by which one grasps the imperishable, that which does not. All of this is. Why is he using the term perishable? Why not some other term like the infinite or the eternal or the supreme or lots of other? Why imperishable? What's the implication? When certain words are chosen amongst synonyms, when there are options, there's a reason for choosing one synonym. What do you think that might be? The stuff we get from ritual is perishable. Let's say you do a ritual for a child. Well, that's perishable. You get your child, and then what? And then the child grows up and goes off to college. It doesn't email you. Didn't send you any Vedic emails. Perishable. So therefore, the imperishable is in a sense, it's a subtle dig all the way through, and there's some very actually strong statements against the fire sacrifice in this particular Upanishad. We are recording, yes, I hope. Recording, yes. So there's a subtle dig, whereas the Atman is imperishable because it's eternal, not transient. So, who cannot be seen? What cannot be grasped? Can't see the Atman, and we can't see the supreme Atman. Without color, without sight or hearing, these are all qualities of material things. Material things have quality. Well, Atman has no material quality. It's not a material substance. It's not a material entity, so it doesn't have. So it's not. So therefore, it's not the support of qualities associated with material substances. What are the qualities associated with material substances? Well, texture, form, shape, color, and all those sorts of things. Taste, sound. But the Atman doesn't have any of those. So without sight or hearing, without hands or feet, which is eternal and all-pervading, eternal, not like these rituals, all-pervading, potentially infinite, right? Extremely minute yet present everywhere. Different ways of understanding that. One is that the Atman is situated in the corner of the heart, but it pervades the body. And what if there is no body and no mind? Well, what's to stop it pervading everything, like a light bulb? If you take the light bulb, potentially, light bulb could pervade the whole universe if there was no atmospheric, kind of restrictions to it. So like that. That is the immutable, which the wise fully perceive. And in Indian traditions, God and the Atman, but now we're not really talking much about the relationship. We've already said something about, for some traditions, they're one and the same. Please keep this in mind all the time. Advaita, the non-dualists, discussed it last week. Drop of water hitting the ocean, just remember that, and you'll get Advaita. What happens to the drop of water? It looks like a drop, doesn't it? It looks like an entity, an individual, but what happens when it hits the ocean? Not that it disappears, it's just that it loses its individuality and merges into the totality of the ocean. That's Advaita, non-dual, but the dualists and Ramanuja we'll be looking at later on. We'll say more when we get there. The Atman is always an individual Atman, and God is always a distinct being, or even though God might pervade everything, sustain everything, and in a sense, everything emanates from God. So you can sort of say everything is God, fine, but within God there are differences. Not a homogeneous oneness as it is for Advaita. So Ramanuja, that we'll be turning to immediately after the Upanishads, that'll be next week. He's 11th, 12th century. Member of the Vedanta, one of the Vedanta lineages, the theist, strong believer in a distinct God, Vishnu. His lineage is called Sri Vaishnavism, very strong in Tamil Nadu in India today. They wear the white sacred clay with the red in the middle. So for him, he likes this next verse. Look, as a spider spins out threads, then draws them into himself. Isn't that a nice metaphor for creation? Why? Because number one, the spider is an intelligent being. Number two, the threads are coming from the spider, but just in a sense, but in another sense, they're distinct from the spider. So you could say, God, everything comes from God, so God is everything, but that God doesn't lose an individual and distinct presence in that process. Just as the entire labyrinth, and have you seen the cobwebs? Aren't they beautiful works of art? Shiny, glittery, ghastly in what they have to do, which is trap poor old flies, but beautiful aesthetically. So this creation is beautiful, but it's kind of also is ghastly. There's death everywhere. Here we are sitting in this beautiful spot, right over there. See, over the grass, and there's ants getting torn apart by bigger bugs. We see, oh, what a nice, pretty garden. But what's going on right underneath, right in, in almost an eye level, right in the undergrowth? Creatures are tearing each other apart. It's kind of horrific. So therefore, we'll bracket that for now. But so this metaphor of a spider spinning out threads, as plants sprout out from the earth, as head and body hair grows from a living man, so from the imperishable all things here spring. Remember, this is sort of characteristic of the Upanishad. These metaphors, you will not see them. Well, not see them very. You might see them very occasionally in the Vedanta tradition, but in the later philosophical traditions, you're not going. There are some metaphors, but not as abundant as you find them in the Upanishads. Okay. So there we are, and we'll move on. And here's, just in case this is not really connected to our course, which is about Ishvara, but we'll come back and read this if we have time. Okay, let's see. We've got an hour and 20 minutes. We'll come back and read these bit about the Vedic sacrifice and how the Upanishads are dismissive. But here we'll just say, well, you look at the language, wallowing in ignorance. That's strong language, isn't it? The ones who do the ritualists, time and again, the fools imagine. We have reached out. Okay, we'll come back to this, and I'd like to read this with you, but I want to make sure we get in our main verses, which are more connected to our theme of theism. Here, another metaphor. As from a well-stoked fire, sparks fly by the thousands. Now, are sparks the same as the fire or different? Depends on how you want to use this metaphor. I'm sure that Sāṃkhya, Advaita, Vedanta would say, well, it looks like the sparks are individual and they seem to have been spat out by the fire, but really, put them back in the fire, they're just fire. You certainly could see it that way. You could use the metaphor that way. But Ramanuja, the Jew, who sees a difference between the soul, could say, well, the fire may the sparks may be contained within the fire. They may emanate out from the fire, but they're distinct entities. The spark lands on your finger. It's not the whole fire. So, so it could go either way. So, as from a well-stoked fire, sparks fly by the thousands, all looking just like it. The Atman, in one sense, is tiny compared to the Supreme Atman, who's infinite and all-pervading and all-powerful, whereas the Atman is infinitesimal rather than infinite, and massively, very little, but still it's consciousness. It's a conscious entity, and so is God a conscious entity. Sometimes God is called Paramatman, the Supreme Atman, and our Atman, our individual Atmans are just Atmans. So you can say all looking just like it. In that sense, we're, the Christians might say, made in the image of God. Doesn't mean we are God, doesn't mean we lose our individuality, but we are conscious, rational beings. Christian wouldn't have a problem with that. So just as that is the case, so from the imperishable, one of the common terms for the supreme, one of the qualities, it's not the only qualities, is Sat, remember, being, isness, ongoing existence, always existing, so which is eternal. Other qualities too, but one is imperishable. So from the imperishable issue diverse things, this creation, a creation full of diversity. And into it, my friend, they return. Remember the Chandogya, the rivers, we think it's this river and that river, the Hudson and the Ganga, but they all just go back into the ocean, just like the bees. They take nectar from this tree, from this plant, and nectar from that plant, but it all goes back into one honey. So somehow or other we all emanate from God and return to God. Clearly not systematic, not meant to give us minute details, as we'll find, let's say in the Krishna tradition, we'll get a very vivid description of this imperishable. Krishna will say, I'm the imperishable, I'm God. And we'll get descriptions of what the kingdom of God looks like and what is the relationship between the souls and God. We'll look at that at the end of the semester, at least in one tradition, one Hindu tradition, Krishna tradition. But for now, we see that all of them will lay claim to this. They all see this. They will see that the Upanishads are stating their truth, but just in a very, very basic, unelaborated way. And so later traditions would see themselves as elaborating, unpacking, embellishing, developing, increasing the knowledge about these little statements like this in the Upanishads. They see themselves as, based in this, but providing much, much more information than we find in these source texts. The person indeed is divine. So here we have, is it God or is it the soul? Different schools will read it differently. Theistic schools who might take that as a reference to God. But the non-dualists, they don't believe in God. They believe ultimately everything is just one Brahman. And God is only, remember, there's only a mirage. Creation is a mirage. Creator is a mirage. Real within the mirage is confinement of the illusority, the illusionness of the mirage, illusoriness. One of those words. Then once you break out of that, then you realize that there is no duality at all. No you worshipping some distinct God. That's Advaita Vedanta, not Ramanuja, not the theists. So for them, the person is a distinct being. So that person indeed is divine. He has no visible form, not a material form. Does that mean he has no form at all? That's an issue we'll deal with later. But all agree he does not have a material form of flesh and blood, because material forms obviously are what? They're temporary. What else? They're limited. I'm limited. My eyes can only see the instruments of my body has instruments. Those instruments their range is limited, and I can only be conscious through my instruments. I can only know the external world through my five senses. That's a limitation. So God does not bound in that way. So therefore, God cannot have a material form. Now, might he have a spiritual form? That will revisit. I'm writing a book on that, as a matter of fact. So we'll revisit that later in the semester. He has no visible form. Can't see it with your eyes. He's both within and without. Everyone accepts that God is everywhere. But the question is there only God and nothing else, and everything else is a superimposition? Like a mirror, when you superimpose in photography, you put one picture on top of another, but it's not really real. Something like that. Or is God within and without, but there's nonetheless differences in God's nature between God's within, his own personal being, and without his presence as the created world and as the infinitude of souls such as you and I. He's within and without, unborn, without breath or mind, without material breath or mind. Must have some, right? We read in the past, he thought, let me become many. So there must be some kind of intelligence there and thinking function, rational function. So whenever the Upanishads say without this, without that, you should always remember it's referring to material, in this case, breath and mind. He's radiant and further than the furthest imperishable, right? The imperishable things, but he's even further than that, further than anything that's imperishable. What's imperishable? What matter, in a sense, is, the things of matter are perishable. What emerges from matter, but matter itself, everything goes back into matter. So in that sense, that matter itself, primordial matter, prakriti, it's called in Sanskrit, Prakriti. as the metaphysical matrix of everything. Prakriti is eternal. All right, so we're just going to jump around a bit, and then we'll just go down to the next page. If we have time, we'll just come back and just read bits and pieces from here and there. It's perfectly okay. Well, let's just actually let's go back. So we'll read this in sequence. From him comes. Well, here we have a sort of a way of trying to visualize him with our material. You know, we're bound by material minds. And so therefore, we only know things made of matter, which we perceive material things. They get imprinted in our memories, in our minds. It's in Sanskrit, samskara. Don't confuse that with samsara, without the K. Samskara with a K is a memory imprint. So we see all these things. And we read things, we see them, and they all get imprinted, and they become, memories, and we put them together and make concepts. So how can we think of God? We can only, our minds only is, we can only manifest to mind. The only thinking we can manifest our mind can manifest for our consciousness to be aware of are things that ultimately are grounded in perceivable reality. And from that we make, we can make inferences and conceptualize and theorize. So how do you meditate on God who is completely non-material? So if we don't have any mental imprint of a non-material entity, our mind doesn't know what that means. If you think of the word immaterial, it's actually a negation of what we do know. We know matter, so immaterial. So often imperishable. We had that word before. So a lot of the descriptors of God are actually negatives of things we know. Well, what else can they say other than it is sat and it's conscious shit? And then we had that thing about being blissful. Otherwise, a lot of the Upanishadic sort of talk about God is negatives. Not this, not this, not this. We had that neti. Well, here's an example of neti. Imperishable, not perishable. Immortal, not mortal. Infinite, no finites, and so on. So does that mean we can't meditate on him at all? Well, here's a meditation. I mean, obviously the Upanishad is not suggesting his head is the fire, his eyes are the sun and moon. It's not that primitive at all. Of course it's not. But it's giving us a way of contemplating God through nature, the God of natural theology, actually, in the Western intellectual tradition. So since a lot of Indian meditational practice, remember, it's not just about believing in God or arguing for or against the existence of God, but the goal is to perceive God, perceive God, maybe not with the material eyes, but actually experience that divine being. Your own Atman, that's one thing, but also the supreme Atman, distinct from yours. If you happen to be a theist, that is distinct. If you're a non-dualist, it's the same thing. I have to keep saying that. The goals of the tradition are also different. If you're Advaita, then the goal is really, there's no difference between you and the supreme. There's only one experience in the end, and that's the experience of everything. And there's no more you. You are now part of that everything. Whereas in the theist, there's two different experiences, because the soul is distinct from God eternally. So you can experience your soul. And maybe, and from their point of view, some yogis, some seekers stop there, that's it. And maybe they don't accept God or they're not interested in God. They've attained their own soul. But with those traditions say, fine, you see your own soul, but there's also another soul. But in both cases, whatever you accept, the goal is experience. And let's be clear about that. So here's a meditation for his head is the fire, his eyes are the moon, his ears are the quarters, speech of the Vedas, breath is the wind. Okay, it's not meant to be a primitive, anthropomorphic, unsophisticated construal of God. Of course it isn't. It's a way of fixing the mind on that which is beyond the mind. So we fix the mind, we create this image, and that way we're in a sense we're manifesting the absolute in that form. And then we'll see in most of the theistic traditions, there's grace. So God sees that we're making an attempt to approach him. And of course, there's the goddess as well. But for now, we use the term him because Ishvara is masculine and so forth. And his Purusha is masculine. But there are goddess traditions. It would be she. So then God can manifest when he sees our efforts we can't perceive God. But so okay, well let's do the best we can with these being imprisoned in these minds with their limited ability to manifest concepts and thought, which simply ultimately stem from the things we do know and perceive. So we make a meditational technique with the sun and the moon as the eyes of God, and then use that as a temporary support for the mind until the grace of God can be gained. So all of these Vedas spring from him, right? So here's God as creator, right? These are the four Vedas: Rig verses, Saman chants, Yajur formulas, right? God's celestial beings, human, beasts, and birds. From him, in diverse ways, they spring. In breath, out breath. We don't read the whole thing. The rites, the 7 breaths, pranas. Later tradition speaks of 5. Here there's 7. The 7 flames. So he's going with the number 7. 7 oblations. And you look, by the way, there are footnotes if you're interested in what are all these 7. From him spring all oceans. There's footnotes to this volume of the Upanishads. I'm not sure if I put it up on Sakai, but if anybody wants me to put the footnotes up, let me know. From him spring all oceans and hills. From him flow. You don't need to know this sort of thing for the quiz. Of course you don't. What are the 7? I'm not going to ask you a question like, what are the 7 breaths? What are the 7? Of course I will. I'm not going to ask you something that's not totally unfair. But if you're interested personally, we can see what the footnotes say. But those are not the sorts of questions you'll find out. Of course, they're going to be, much more mainstream and representative question. This is just a random one verse happens to mention these 7 things, and it's not representative of the body of the Upanishad. So those are not I'll be expecting you to know. From him spring oceans and hills, rivers, all of this, plants, verse 10. All this is simply that person. Bhagavan, the Purusha. Rites, penance, prayer, Brahman, the highest immortal, one who knows this, my friend, hidden within the cave. Remember the cave. Where's the cave? The heart. Whenever it says the cave, it's referring to the heart. Why the cave? Well, it's the innermost thing. And it's your secret cave. Nobody knows your heart. Caves are like secret, secluded, cloistered things, closed things. The Atman is considered to sort of emanate, consciousness of Atman emanates forth from the cave of the heart. Consciousness emanates out, and that's the heart. Okay. So there we have it. And we'll move on with our Upanishad. What is smaller than the smallest and intensely bright? The effulgence. It's not like our physical light, but the only thing you can compare it with is the light. What else are you going to compare it with? You can only use metaphors. I don't say anything. How is anybody ever going to know that they even have an Atman? But to speak of that, the goal of life is to seek it. So either you don't say anything, and so lots of yogis go and sit in the Himalayas, and that's it. They check out. They're not interested in the world. They leave the rest of us here to suffer. But some are really compassionate. You have a beautiful thing in Buddhism where even those who are capable of becoming enlightened and entering in that final state and completely having nothing to do, being absorbed in their own bliss, no need for the world or anything, they postpone that to help others attain their enlightenment. In Buddhism, it's called the Bodhisattva. In Hinduism, it's called the Jivan Mukta. So either we don't say anything, well, then we're no good to anybody. Fine, we might meditate in our own Atman, but the rest of the world goes to hell. Or we have to use words. And words are just words. Here's an example. Imagine you're a fish. Let's say a deep sea water fish. And that means not a fish that comes up to the surface and maybe jumps up and maybe sees, a boat once in a while, or an island a desert island. Not that kind of a fish. Deep sea. Never seen. Can only exist in the bottom of the ocean. And you had to describe to that fish what land was like, what a jungle was like. What on earth are you going to say? You have to describe the Amazon rainforest with all of the parrots and its creatures and its wondrous insects and bugs. How are you going to do that? What language will you use that a deep sea fish has access to. Think about it. You'd have to say something like, well, the jungle is like seaweed. That's probably the closest thing you can say. How useful is that to describe the Amazon rainforest? See the problem? So similarly, those who have experienced the Atman, the bliss of the Atman, bliss of the Supreme Being, what are they going to say? How are they going to describe it? Oh, so we had that passage. Remember the bliss of the King who owns the whole world. Well, next level up 100 times. It's just an attempt to give some sense of. I think one of our students emailed me and said it was 10 to the power of 20 bliss. The bliss of Brahman is 10 to the power of 20. The bliss of a king who has perfect health and owns the whole world. Obviously, that's rhetorical. But what else are you going to do? You're trying to teach because these sages write this for our well-being. They don't need to. And so you have to use words. And so then you do the best you can. Okay. So here we are. It's smaller than the smallest and intensely bright. So what bright mean for us? Bright means the sun. We think of intense bright. The sun. Don't look at the sun; it'll burn your eyes. So that's the closest we got. All right, we'll call it intensely bright. Clearly, it's very luminous. In which rest these worlds and those who live therein. All of us, we live within God. It is the imperishable Brahman. It is breath. It is the immortal. It is what we must strike, my friend. Strike it. How do we strike it? What is he saying? Strike it. We need to. That's the goal of life, is to seek it, realize it, attain it. Everything else useless, my friends. What's everything else? We flap around. We get married. Oh, I'm going to get married. We have kids. We'll buy our first house. And then what? We end up getting old and dying. What do you think is not going to happen to you? Look at your grandparents. From a yogi point of view, it's all foolishness. You never, and you can never find happiness doing those sorts of things. So see, we must strike it, said the Upanishad. That's what we should be looking for. And so now another metaphor. Take the bow. So now it's going to have a metaphor of a bow striking a target with an arrow, which is really the Atman seeking Brahman. So let's go with the metaphor. Take this, my friend, take the bow with this great, what is the bow? The great weapon of the Upanishads. Why is that a bow? A bow is that which, it's the instrument we use to strike the target. So what's the instrument? First of all, we need to know about the Atman. We need to know about Ishvara. We need to know about God. Where are we going to get the knowledge from? It's not going to just pop into our minds from nowhere. We'll get it from the Upanishads. And if you're, in ancient India, if you're a Hindu or if you're part of the Indian traditions, that's the origins of these teachings are the Upanishads. So that's the great weapon, the bow. Place veneration on it. Treat it with respect, like any sacred text. As the whetted arrow, stretch it with the thought fixed on the nature of that. So the mind should be fixed on that. That should be our goal in life. So that's the whetted arrow. Stretched with thoughts. I think actually the arrow may be on. Let's have a look. Now he changes the metaphor a bit. That very imperishable, that very, oh, you know what? We jumped the page. There we go. That very imperishable target, the imperishable is the target, my friend. Strike it. Seek the Brahman. The bow is Om, but back down here it said the bow of the Upanishads. Now it's saying Om. Om now we're meeting for the first time, but we'll encounter it throughout the Upanishads, is Brahman in sonic form, the form of sound. Brahman comes as sound. That sound is Om. Reminds me of the Moody Blue albums. There's a Moody Blue albums called in Search of the Lost Chord or something like that. Those of you my age will know that. But anyway, if you want to go online, type in Moody Blues album In Search of the Lost Chord, and then I think it's the first one. That's Om. And how Om is. I forget how they frame it, the Moody Blues, because Hinduism was kind of very hip in the 60s counterculture. A lot of gurus came over. That's when yoga came over. That's when meditation came over. Now all of these things are part of our American landscape. But mostly, not the very first time they came over, but the first time they became part of popular culture. That was the 60s. So bow is Om. The arrow is the self. So the self has to connect with Brahman. And how are we going to do that? We're going to chant Om. We're going to absorb the mind in meditation on Om. And also, in the previous part of the study Upanishads, after where we even know about Om other than the Upanishads. So same thing. It's not a contradiction. It's just changing the metaphor. The target is Brahman, they say. One must strike that undistracted. This is not some frivolous quest. Why do they shave their heads and go to the forest? Those who seek Brahman give their whole life intensely. Because why? Because everything else perishable. Why do you think they keep saying imperishable, imperishable? All this other is perishable. Your student life perishable. You'll do it now. Your Hindu philosophy class perishable. Your grades perishable. Get your degree perishable. Go interviewing for a job perishable. Get your job perishable. Find a partner perishable. More perishable. Buy your home, first home, perishable, have your kids. All right, you've had enough of that. So that alone is the self you must understand, on which are woven the earth, intermediate region and sky. Somehow, here Atman and Brahman, again, we've discussed it, sometimes they're interchangeable. Everything rests on that Brahman. The mind together with all breaths, put away other words, for this is the dike to the immortal. Don't waste time with any other words. Put them away. Don't chatter. Om is the dike to the immortal, the bank, the means, going from this realm to that realm, from this dimension to that dimension, from this sense, from our mundane perception of reality to a real, deep level perception of real reality, underlying reality. Okay? When the veins come together like spokes, in it is that one taking birth in me. I'm not going to talk about this, but these are the subtle veins, not the gross blood veins. Part of the subtle physiology that becomes important in some later schools, especially the Tantra schools. But that's not, we don't have time to diverge. It is Om. Meditate thus on the self. How do we meditate on the self? You can't. How are you going to meditate on the self? You can't see the self. What are you going to meditate on the concept of the self? That's not a very powerful form of meditation. Mine's not going to be very, try that. You get fed up within 5 minutes. So how do we meditate on the self? Well, we meditate on form. That's a sound. And the mind can be fixed on that sound. This is the Mundaka. This is the prescription it's giving. This is the method it is giving. We'll see it, that same method in Patanjali, Bhagavad Gita. Later traditions will also Om, but some of them will expand that Om into Om Namo Shivaya for the Shiva traditions, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya for the Krishna traditions, but Om remains there as the seed. Now, seeds can also give fruits. So Om can become Shiva, Om can become Krishna. Basic, everybody agrees, Om. That is the sonic encapsulation of Ishvara, of God. It is Om. Meditate thus. This is the way you meditate on the self. Good luck to you as you cross beyond the darkness. Thank you. Thank you. Well, we need luck. Very kind of you. So when one sees him, but they're kind. They're kind. You get a sense of kindness from these teachers. Teachers are kind. Why do they dedicate their lives to teaching? Because they care about people. And not just the physical people. They have their understanding of personhood is deeper than just the body. Their kind of welfare work is not, they don't neglect the body, but that's not their primary focus. It's not their primary interest. It's not primarily what they seek to instruct us about. The deep level self, the outward self. Because the body's going to die. Of course you have to maintain it, go to the doctor. But however much access you have to Medicaid or best medical facility, well, whatever the best is, you have access to. What's going to happen at the end? So that's how the sages think. They say, okay, there's doctors in the world, fine. They let them do their dharmas. The psychologist says all of this. Nutritionists, all good, right? But who's teaching about the real self? Because all that other stuff, perishable, perishable, perishable. Why do you think it keeps saying imperishable? So therefore they set themselves, that's their niche in the world. Everybody has a niche, a dharma, a duty, a contribution that could be made. And people who teach Upanishadic, like the Vedantins and some of these Upanishadic teachers, are reaching out to teach about the self, because that's there. For them, that's the highest gift you can give, is knowledge of the real self, because that is imperishable. Other gifts won't last. Okay, I'm going to keep repeating it. Why? Because the Upanishads keep repeating it. Why? Because we don't want to hear it. Why don't we want to hear it? Because we're attached to this world. What are we attached to? What are we attached to? Stupid TV shows. What else? Playing stupid games on our computers. Does that make you happy, my friends? Music. He is sick of it. All right. Where are we now? So the veins. It's Om, okay? Om, right. So let's move down to when one sees him. Remember, goal is perception of the Atman. When? It's not saying if, when. If you do the practices, we will perceive this is science, actually. It's science in the sense of hypothesis, experimentation, verification. The only, how it differs from science is that material science is demonstratable to others. Others can perceive it. Whereas this, because it's your own innermost Atman, unless others do the practice, they cannot verify your results. So in that sense, we wouldn't be able to say it's science in the way that material science is understood in the academy. But it has scientific aspects to it, which are what? Okay, there's a hypothesis. The Upanishads are saying that there's an Atman. We'll say, well, we don't know if there is or there isn't. Okay, let's accept the hypothesis. Then what? Verification is a process. Here it's giving the process the chant Om. Patanjali is going to develop that much more, the process by which we can see the Atman on the one hand and also Ishvara. Remember, I'm going to be presenting them as two distinct things. Most traditions accept them as two distinct things, but Advaita Vedanta would not, and I want you to be clear about that. Advaita Vedanta, non-dualists would say, no, you are God, God is you. There is no word. So when one sees him, both the high and the low, the knot of one's heart is cut. When we see God, but what is the knot? Desire. What binds us to this world, my friends? When you get out of bed, what drives you? Go to school, go to classes, all the things we do. What's the drive behind them? The satisfaction of desires. We go to school because we want to get a job. We want to be, make money. Why? Because we think that's going to make us happy. Everything you do, you date. You date somebody. What are you trying to do? Find happiness, satisfy desire. How complicated that is. All that mental turmoil. What do the yogis do? Shave their head, go to the forest. None of this dating nonsense. It's simply complicated. Simply mental anxiety. Shave your head. Become a recluse. Chant Om. That's the Mundaka. That's what the Mundaka would have us do. So the knots are the desires. Think about it. When you have a desire, you're actually tied to the object of desire. Let's say you have a desire for, you're hungry and you have a desire for a piece of pizza. Your mind is trapped by that now until you have that pizza. That's a rather insignificant desire. But let's say you have a desire to, get married, or a desire to have a house. Those are huge knots. You can think of them as a knot. You're now knotted. Your life, your intention, your mind, your thinking, your contemplation, your peace of mind, all knotted to that object of desire. It's a knot. So if we want to be free of anxiety and rebirth, remember, we're not talking a lot about karma, but every time you act in the world to fulfill a desire, you plant a seed of reaction. And the reactions don't all fit in this life. Maybe some do, but most do get in the next life. So that means what? You have to come back. You reborn again. What's that? Samsara, the cycle of birth and death. That's a knot. What is perpetuating that situation of action and reaction? The knot of desire. So then when the knot of the heart is cut, all doubts are dispelled. You perceive the Atman. Then all works come to an end. No more work, no more running around. Oh, I got to get a degree. Oh, I got to get married. Oh, I got to buy a house. Oh, I need a new car. Oh, this, all of this, our life, we're running around. We wonder why we're always frustrated. Oh, why am I? Oh, I'm such a good person. I'm always frustrated. I'm never fulfilled. What's missing? What's missing? Oh, that's what's missing. Fleeting things, perishable things, using from the point of view of Upanishads, they can never satisfy the heart. So all his works come to an end. No more flapping about. If you act in the world, it's simply to help others. You're not making any more karma because there's no desire. So if you act in the world, there's no personal body-mind desire. There's a desire to help others. That's a different category of desire. That does not create karma. It burns karma. Not only does it not create karma, burns karma. Anything you do for service to God, you'll find out in the Gita and elsewhere. No karma. So, but all other works come to an end. Other works based on this foolish illusion that if I attain this object, I will be happy. Whether that object's a partner, a wife, a husband, a house, whatever it is. Your VA, it's perishable. In that high golden container is Brahman, stainless and partless. We're using human language. Golden container. How else are you going to describe it? Stainless. Okay, we know. What do we think of stainless? Stainless steel. we always okay. But it's not corrupted or with desire. Actually, stainless means no ignorance, no ego. What's ego? I'm body mind. That's ego. What's true? What's truth? I'm not one. That's real ego. Pure ego. It's a stainless. Say only reason to continue action is to seek the self. So the brilliant light of lights, back to our luminous metaphors of luminosity. This is what they know, those who know the self. What do they know? They don't know about the next sitcom, the next movies. What's coming out in the movies? Yeah, they don't know that stuff. What's the latest model of car model? What do they know? They know the golden container of Brahman, stainless and partless, brilliant light of lights. This is what they know, those who know the sun. There, the sun does not shine. Well, all this talk of luminosity, but it's not coming from the sun, my friends. So the sun doesn't shine there. It's infinitely bright, but not because of the sun, nor the moon, nor the stars. They right? And it goes on. Let's see. Lightning doesn't shine. Of the common fire need we speak. Well, if there's no sun, moon, and we don't have to waste words talking about fire. See how nice this is written? Of the common fire need we speak. This is 2.5 millennia old, my friend. That is so beautiful. Him alone as he shines, do all things reflect. Any luminosity in our world is a reflection of that, Brahman. How about that? Like a mirror reflects light. But the mirror itself is not luminous, it's just reflective. This whole world radiates with his light, Brahman's light, that light. Brahman alone here extends to the east, Brahman to the west, it alone to the south, to the north. Everything in one sense, but also distinct. It alone extends above and below. It is Brahman alone that extends over this whole world, up to its widest extent. Here we have an interesting verse that we see in the next Upanishad next week. 2 birds, companions and friends. Another metaphor, simple, rustic, country type metaphors, not complicated. 2 birds, companions and friends, nestle on the same tree. One of them eats a tasty fig, it's a fig tree. The other, not eating, looks on. Stuck on the very same tree, one person grieves, deluded by her who is not the Lord. But when he sees the other, the contented Lord, and his majesty, his grief disappears. Now, here's a good example of how a verse in the Upanishad is going to be read differently by Advaita, Vedanta, the non-dualists, the monists, right? Everything is only Brahman, no individual soul. We think we're individuals because we're in ignorance, but when ignorance is dispelled, we realize we are that Brahman, and actually this whole world evaporates. We realize it was never there in the first place. And there's no more we realizing anything when we get to that final state. There's just all-pervading pure Brahman. So for them, okay, Advaita Vedanta, I'm going to keep repeating, because I don't have access to you. I don't know if you're sitting in a classroom, you get a sense of students are getting it, and then well, I'm being repetitive if you stop. Or you see a few blank faces, and you have to keep repeating it. This format doesn't lend itself to that. So forgive me, my friends, if I'm repetitive, and honor the fact that the Upanishads are repetitive. So we're in that. We're following the mood of the Upanishads. Now, how would Advaita Vedanta? Advaita Vedanta is a school. Founder of the school is Shankara, 8th to 9th century. I'm not going to repeat that until we get to Vedanta. Then I'll repeat it again. They would say the true birth would be the Atman in the ignorant state, and the Atman when he gets enlightened. So in the ignorance, one of them is eating a tasty fig. What's that? The things of this world. Let me try this. Let me try this. Back to the business of chasing desires. Those knots, those bonds, running around. Let me taste this, taste that. Try this, try that. Try this. Watch this movie. Watch that movie. Yeah, there's just looks content. Doesn't need anything. Fully self-contained. Fully blissful. Right. 10 to the power of 20 bliss. Stuck on the very same tree. One person grieves, deluded. Right. Because if you're seeking desires, you're always going to be grieving. If you think life is about fulfilling desires, my friends, tell me, if you don't believe this now, send me an email in 10 years' time. Tell me if things look different. The Upanishads, all of the Indian traditions, Buddhism, Jainism are going to tell us that no desire can satisfy you. And not only does it not satisfy you, it leaves you feeling unfulfilled. What does it say here? Deluded. Oh, I need this, I need this, I need this. And then we're miserable because we don't have something. And then we get it. And then what? Okay, it's good for 10 minutes or whatever. A month, a year, fine. And then what? Boring or something else becomes normal. No longer desirable. So one person grieves deluded by her who is not the Lord. Right? That's the ignorant Atman. But when he sees the other, the contented Lord, his majesty, his grief disappears. Now, for Shankara, when the deluded soul gives up these desires, gives up this bondage to the world, reads the Upanishads, hears about the pure Atman, turns to it, and they become fulfilled and becomes enlightened. Now, Ramanuja, 100 years later, he's the founder of another Vedanta school. And it's not Advaita Vedanta, it's Vishishta Advaita Vedanta. Keeps the term Advaita, but he adds Vishishta. Okay, everything is God, but there's differences in God. There's a real soul. The soul is never going to be God. It's only going to be an eternal spark of God, to use the fire metaphor. World is real. It's not going to disappear as a mirage does. So there's a real God sitting with the real Atman. Ramanuja says God accompanies us, the soul, everywhere. It's the Antaryamin. So there, and only God accompanies the soul, not because God needs anything from the world, but just out of love for the soul. But the soul has free will. So the soul is free. He's eating the fig, same as Shankara eating the fig of the world. That part of it they both agree on. It's the fig are the offerings of the world, the sense objects, the sense objects of sight, sound, taste, smell, right? And we try to find things that are pleasing to our senses. We try to eat nice food, listen to nice sounds, smell nice things, look at nice objects. Sense objects. Senses, they're objects. So if the other one is we're just waiting for the soul to get frustrated, stuck in the same tree, one person grieves, deluded by her who is not. But when he sees the other, when we turn to God, the contented Lord, God doesn't need anything. Fully can self-contain. Otherwise, what kind of a God is that? Fulfilled. Aptarama. Bliss within. And his majesty, his grief disappears. When the seer sees that person, again, both of them are going to say, what's the person? Shankara, the person is your own Atman. Ramanuja, no, the person is God. You may have an Atman, but there's another Atman, that's God. So they understand all of these passages differently, many of them. They agree on a lot of things, but when it comes to whether there's a supreme God, they differ. Okay, whether is the Atman the highest truth? Yes, Shankara. Ramanuja, no. There's a truth higher than the Atman. So when the seer sees that person, the golden color, the creator, the Lord, as the womb of Brahman, the source of Brahman, or you could say, sometimes it speaks with the Brahman is everything and is the supreme cause. But sometimes there's a suggestion that there's something that even Brahman rests on that being. So here is the womb of Brahman. That suggests that Brahman is kind of a secondary highest truth, resting on something even higher, depending on how you read this. Then shaking off the good and the bad, karma, good karma, bad karma. The wise man becomes spotless and attains the highest identity. Okay. So moving along. Hope you're enjoying this as much as I love it. By truth, this self be grasped. By austerity, what's austerity? Giving up desires. When you give up desires, that's austerity. You cut down on eating, cut down on all of these objects of the senses. That's austerity, tapas. Austerity means cut down the objects of the senses. Why? Because you're trying to free yourself from the knots of desire that bind you. You become a servant of them. Oh, what desire comes in your mind? Oh, let me run after and fulfill it. You're a servant, you're a slave. Even some of the Greek ascetics understood that, Stoics, others, Plato. So how are you going to grasp the self? By austerity. First thing you have to do is get rid of these desires in the mind. Why? Because if the mind is full of desires, what are you going to do with your mind? Chase desires. So what are you not going to do? Seek the self. Your mind is full of desires and you're chasing desires. You don't have any mental space to seek the self, except in a very kind of, not a very serious sort of way. So by austerity, by right knowledge, where are you going to get the right knowledge? Upanishads, the sacred text. Your minds can't figure it out. So you have to take help from beyond, from the words of the sages and the enlightened beings and the sacred texts. By a perpetually chaste life. What chaste meaning? Free of always running around seeking some desire. Celibacy becomes a part of, a serious seeker who's going to be called brahmacharya in Sanskrit, right? Because sex desire is the strongest of all desires. And where does it get you? Satisfy ever? Ask yourselves. Isn't it always much more complicated than you imagine in your fantasies? Always complicated. Emotionalities, feelings get hurt, people get dumped. Broken hearts. Think about it. Think about the price you pay, my friends. Put it on a scale. Weigh it. Tell me, if you were an alien and had no more emotions, and you took our so-called love and courtship and dating, and you let's say you didn't understand any of that, but you said somehow you put a scale. Okay, what do you get out of it? Sex or whatever you think you get out of it, and what does it cost you? Imagine what that scale, the balance would look like. Ask yourselves. Perpetually chaste life. It lies within the body. Atman, right? Consciousness is in me. It's not on the table or out there in space, and it's in the body. Brilliant, full of light. Right, back to the old metaphors. Which ascetics, that's what I was trying to say with a C. See, A-S-C, ascetics perceive. When their faults are wiped out, the karma, is all of their reactions to their deeds from infinite lives, all wiped out. The real alone, my friends, where are we? I've lost my page. By truth. Okay, we're there. The real alone he wins. Never the unreal. What's not real? Objects of desire are unreal. Why are they unreal? They don't last. They dissolve. They rot. They fall apart. They break. And eventually they die. Along the real runs the path. Okay, let's skip that. It is large, heavenly, of inconceivable form, yet it appears more minute than the minute. Right? Consciousness appears to be like minutely within us. So in that sense, minute. It is further than the furthest in the Brahman sort of sense. And yet it is here at hand, right within us, all of us. It is right here within those who see, hidden within the cave of their heart. Not by sight, not by speech, not by any sense. Can't see it, can't grab it with your instruments. Not by austerities or rites. The Vedic rites is he grasped. Rather the partless one. Out when there's no parts. Why is that important? Because you have parts, you break it apart. And if you break it apart, then what? Then it wasn't eternal, then was it? If something can be broken apart, then that thing, like a box, well, you can rip the lid off and rip the sides off. Well, you don't have the box anymore. So you can't say the box is eternal if it had parts. Anything has parts, including atoms, and atoms have parts, neutrons and electrons. So anything with parts, you can break them apart. Then that thing, you can't say that thing is eternal. So partless. We'll see that argument later on in the course, and we get this is a philosophical argument. But now it's starting to sound a little bit more like the later, actual philosophers, rationalists. So where are we? It is the partless one is seen by a man as he meditates, not out there, within. And how do you meditate? Fix the mind on Om. That stills the mind. And Om itself is kind of like a portal. It is Brahman. It's kind of like a bridge between the two worlds. And it's called that, actually. And his being has become pure, free of the desires we spoke about. Through the lucidity of knowledge, when you realize desires are just foolishness. Think about, when you're a child, or look at the young children in your family, and look at their little desires. What it is they want? Some silly toy. And we're grown ups, we love them. But it's silly. It's a piece of plastic. They're so over, the child will have a huge tantrum. So something like that. That's how the sages look at us. With our desires, we think of, adult desires, right? Get married, have a home. These are that's how the world functions. From the sages' point of view. So when we become pure of all these illusions, what is an illusion? I will be happy if I can have this. We create a fantasy made of mental imprints of what marriage life is going to look like, what owning a home is going to look like, what having kids are going to be. We create this daydream, which has nothing to do with reality. Reality is always problematic. So we become pure of that. How? Through the lucidity of knowledge. The more we study these texts, the more we study these traditions, the more we immerse our minds in knowledge, the more we see the foolishness of the ways of thinking that we might have had before. Okay. And this down here. Whatever world a man whose being is purified ponders with the mind, whatever you want, whatever desires he covets, that very world, those very desires he wants, you can get it. You can have anything you want. You want a house? That's your world. Then you find one day you'll get a house. You want to go to the celestial realm? One day you'll go there. A man who desires prosperity, therefore, should worship one who knows the self. In other words, the real thing is to worship, is covet the self. That's good. That's a good kind of coveting. Why? Because we will never lose the self. Remember Maitreyi in Yajnavalkya? She wants to settle. I'm going to, settle with Maitreyi. Let me settle. She says, will your things you give me make me immortal? And remember the Brihadaranyaka in Yajnavalkya? He goes, no, it will just make you wealthy. She said, well, what do I want it for then? What's the use of that? That kind of thing. You see the same teachings repeated in all different stories, different narratives. One who hankers after desires and its thoughts is born here and there, reincarnated through his actions. He'll be born here, there, all these different places. But when one's desires are fulfilled, the only one way to fulfill the desires is to desire the self, because that self is eternal, it's blissful, and will never perish. So the bliss that comes from that is not temporary, not perishable. And once one even approaches that, everything else is totally trivial and insignificant. How are we doing for time? We've got 10 minutes. Oneself is made perfect. All his desires disappear in this world. When we realize the up, and everything else disappears. Useless. We realize how foolish those desires were. The self cannot be grasped by teachings or intelligence. You can't grasp. We can learn about it. Obviously, teachings. We do need the teachings. And we need our intelligence, but you can't know it you can't experience it that way. You can know of it. Obviously, we have to know of it before we can think about seeking it. We're not going to seek something we don't know about. So first we have to learn, we have to know, we have to be informed about the existence of Atman and of the Paramatma, the Supreme Atman, the Ishvara. We have to be informed about the existence of these things through the teachings and our intelligence. But we're not going to know. We're not going to experience them in that sense, knowing them through experience. That we need to, for that, these things, we have to cast them aside and just absorb the mind in Om. Only the man he chooses who can grasp him, whose body the self chooses as his own. So that might be, could we read that as an act of grace from God? You could. But there may there's probably other ways of reading that. The self cannot be grasped by a weak man. You need to find it, teachers have to be those who intensely follow. Otherwise, it just gets commodified and consumerized, like yoga has been in the high streets. It's become just some stretching exercise. Can't be grasped like that by a weak man or a person who's not austere and intensely seeking, or through carelessness. It's not some hippy dippy type of thing. Wear an t-shirt like I'm wearing. What am I wearing? A Bhakti Fest t-shirt. Not like that. It's not a frivolous thing. Or even by austerity without the marks. What are the marks? The marks of the ascetics. Different lineages have different marks. And that tells you which Vedanta. We've spoken a bit about the Vedanta lineages. I've introduced you to two of them, Shankara's Advaita. And I've said a few things about Ramanuja a century later and his Vishishta Advaita. You'll be hearing a lot more about that the week after this one. Differentiated non-duality, that there is a real God, that's Ramanuja. But they wear marks. So Ramanuja's is white and red. Shankara's is 3 lines like this. If you look on Hindu posters, like Ganesh or something, you'll see they were one or the other, depending on which lineage they come in. Of course, nowadays, people don't know. Sometimes they put one mark here and then the other one on there, and they don't even know they're different lineages. So that's fine. But marks are ancient lineages that go back, 2,000 years, 2,500 years. When a wise man strives by these means, the self enters his Brahman abode. The ascetics who have firmly determined their goal, they are clear about what they're going to do with their human form of life. They're not going to seek some perishable thing that's eventually going to end up in old age and frustration. They seek the self. They made that determination. The ascetics who have firmly determined their goal. Through a full knowledge of the Vedanta, they've deeply studied the text. Okay, you can't experience it through the text, but you can thoroughly learn about it. And then by learning about it, your conviction to seek it increases. You have to have a strong conviction, especially if you're going to renounce. That doesn't just happen overnight. So that needs to be built up. How's it built up? By studying the text. The ascetics who have firmly determined their goal through a full knowledge of the Vedanta have their being purified. Their minds are purified. How? By the discipline of renunciation. There's no yoga without renouncing desires, my friend. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You want to seek desires, then seek desires then, and that's what you get. Don't cry. Don't cry at the end of it. Oh, it didn't make me happy. Oh, it's so complicated. Oh, I didn't realize there was going to be all these hidden price tags. Hidden little writing, small writing in the contract, the bonds. So we've all been caught by them. So in the worlds of Brahman, at the time of the final end, the moment of death, that's what it's all about. What's your home going to do for you then? What's your kids going to do for you then? What's your spouse going to do for you then? Nothing. Your wealth, nothing, and that's the final moment of death. But what with your meditation on Brahman? Yes, because what are you going to do at the moment of death? Even more intensely, fix your mind on that Brahman, like that, like the bow, the arrow. Even more, because now you're actually going to leave the body, and you're just going to hope that you hit that target. And if you don't, then next life you start off as because you don't forget any of that. You don't leave your practice behind. Krishna says that at the end of the 6th chapter of the Gita. Any progress you make on the path, if you don't finish, you pick up from that point. That's why some, you read stories of great sages at the age of 5, they already renounced the world. How so? They did the work in the past life, didn't quite finish, and they pick up.